We're happy to address any questions you have about data mining and predictive analytics. You can consider this the free consulting segment of our webinar. Open access to the modeling agency's advanced analytic gurus, senior consultants Keith McCormick, and stepping in for Scott, who has to jump out for another item right now, is another highly seasoned TMA senior consultant, Sandra Hendren. Sandra, thanks so much for joining us on short notice.
I'm delighted to be here. How are you, Eric?
We're doing well. Thanks so much. And so each question you submit will receive multiple perspectives. We do have a few good questions coming in now, but there's still room for more for those of you that can stick around with us. So enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel. I'll be pleased to read them aloud for Sandra, myself, or Keith to respond. So let's start with the first one, and this is a fantastic one. We can definitely run amok with this one. Doug asks a phenomenal question. How far can an organization go in predictive analytics using open source tools like KNIME? And I'll kick it open here and say you can go very far, actually, with an open source tool like KNIME. And you may have seen just from the emphasis within the event today that we really want to focus on a lot of the strategic upfront project design issues. That's really what's going to have us end up with productive results. And so, you know, if somebody's going to want to win the race, yes, it's important to have a fast engine and be able to tune it up. But the first thing you should do is really understand the rules of the race and what's required to get past the finish line. Not so much, you know, what's the speed of your engine, because you can end up driving at a fast rate of speed but completely off course, and that's not going to win the race. So I certainly know that Sandra and Keith have a lot more experience with tools, and I think we have a lot of experience in being able to, you know, going back to Keith's slide with being too aggressive or too timid. Looking at open source does allow you, I believe, to take a number of trials while you're standing up an overall practice, and while you can consider which tools would be most fitting on a number of levels, your situation, your environment, the experience of your users, if there's any real-time analysis demands, the variety and type of the data that you're going to be working with. So while you're working with the open source, you can be considering a lot of the other dynamics that would have you right-size the tool that you're ultimately going to use. So that's my opener there. Let me make sure we've got Keith's audio. And Keith, would you like to respond first around how far can an organization go in predictive analytics using open source tools like KNIME? Oh, and Keith, I see on my panel that you're muted. It says that you're self-muted. There you go.
Clumsy with the mouse, Eric. Anyway, hello everybody. So anyway, this has come up quite a bit this year, in particular, not just open source. Open source has been an interesting, you know, topic for a long time, but KNIME in particular has come up in conversation quite often. It seems to be having an increase of popularity this year. It certainly did well in the Gartner Magic Quadrant that just came out in February, so just a month ago. So it seems to be catching on. My sense with KNIME is that you can do pretty much everything that you would need to do. So, you know, would there be any, you know, concerns like that? No one solution is going to be a magic bullet. I've dabbled in KNIME. I can't claim to have mastered it, certainly. We actually do some demonstrations in KNIME and in our own the modeling agency course. I have a colleague, though, that for a series of reasons has had immersive experience with KNIME lately, and he feels that he can do just about everything. He finds that it's a little bit fussier, so he has to be pretty careful that maybe it's not quite as robust with making some mistakes, but that's going to be true. Any tool that you use, there's going to be you know, the little pet peeves that you have. But KNIME is very popular. If you look at the interface, you're going to find that it's fairly easy to learn, and that there's a wealth of features that are added to all the time. So, and now, if there are people on the call that aren't familiar with KNIME, just let me clarify that, you know, a lot of times people think that there's basically two choices. You've got commercial or open source. I usually think of it as three. You know, you have commercial packages, which by their nature have a graphical user interface. And then within open source, you have two choices. You have open source with a graphical user interface like KNIME. It looks like a flow chart. It's very much point and click based. And then thirdly, you have the programming languages like an R and a Python. So I wouldn't want everybody to generalize that open source is always going to have this steep, painful learning curve. A lot of people associate that with R, and that's a common experience for a lot of people that are learning R. But there's also open source options that are point and click that, as a result, are a little bit easier to learn. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on KNIME.
That's terrific advice. And Sandra, what would you like to extend when it comes to starting with open source, and how far can they take you?
I have used KNIME, and I was far more impressed than I thought I would be. It's a wonderful interface. It is a fairly extensive analytic and predictive analytic capability. What I often say to people is use something open source to begin with, especially if you don't have many resources in your company. And of those, I like KNIME the best, to tell you the truth. I've looked at all of them. I've dabbled in all of them. KNIME is my favorite. But when it comes today to be enterprise-wide and/or to have an integrated development and employment environment, I think you should look elsewhere, because KNIME does not do that for you. But you know what? You can go so far with KNIME. I think it's terrific. My impression is go prove something with KNIME and go as far as you can. And when the day comes that you have some resources, I suggest you look at something more enterprise-wide.
I think that's great advice. And we've seen with our assessments that a lot of organizations, if they choose or commit to a tool too soon, they may find that it's not right-sized, and that they've either overinvested or they need to supplement with other tools. So that's always been an interesting aspect. So that's why, oftentimes we'll ask an organization to please refrain from investing in a tool. Commercial software certainly has its merits, and it has its efficiencies, and it's worth investing when you know exactly what the right commercial software is for your specific situation. But again, as you're developing out your analytic factory for the first time, it's best to refrain and use some open source tools to start to prove out some of the analytics that you'll want to be fulfilling for the valid projects that have survived in the assessment phase. So let's go to another question, and we are going a bit over time, obviously, and there are some people that have to get moving. We're down to about a third of what we've started with, so we're certainly grateful for those of you sticking around with us. Let's do another question here coming in from Kim. What advice do you have to get a new data mining department up and running? I'll start this one open. I would say that follow a formal process like what the modeling agency has. It's just an expansion upon the cross-industry standard process for data mining, but it gives you the crib sheet from which to get started and begin with a pilot project only after you've looked around a little bit to ask certain specific questions within the organization to look at which projects are going to be valid, which are going to have greatest interest from leadership, which are going to be most fitting to where they're going to play and either be operationalized or interpreted by functional leaders. So so I would say that to get a new department up and running beyond just a pilot, consider a formal assessment, a comprehensive assessment that looks at all the different dynamics to take into consideration that will overcome a lot of the strategic pitfalls that we outlined in the event today. Just had a message coming in. Looks like my own staff has to get moving. Let me see who this is from. No, I think we've still got both with us. I know I muted you, Keith, because I was getting a little bit of an echo. Yep, that's from your mic, so I'm going to remute that. But as we go around, what other advice would you have in setting up a data mining department? Let's start with Sandra this
time. Boy, that's a variable answer. There is the perfect answer, which is to build the IT department, to get the data warehouse, the enterprise data warehouse built, which has failed so many times and is so suspect, to get an analytics sandbox built, which sometimes happens and sometimes does not. My bottom line is, I agree with Eric that if you could get a strategic assessment first, that is by far the best option. The second best option, which is annoying and messy, is, I hate to say this, do it the best way you can. I've worked with many IT organizations who, they're absolutely right. You need a data governance group, you need a data metadata group, you need to do this right, you need all of those functions, and historically organizations from the smallest ones to the largest ones, because I work for the 12th largest corporation in the nation, they have not done that, and they don't see the need to do that where IT is a cost center, okay? So it can be really very messy, and I wish it were not. So maybe, to come full circle, you could sell a strategic assessment first, because that would be money well spent to have an individualized, a customized assessment for your organization. Can you afford the metadata and the data governance, or do you need to do the messy approach? I'm sorry, I wish I had a better answer, but that's been my observation for years.
No, I think those are great considerations, and when an organization does a comprehensive assessment, like you say, it's highly situational. It takes into account not only where their capabilities are, but what are some potential serious limitations that can be revealed. That and we've had this happen with assessments in the past, where we uncover some significant limitations that have recommended that the organization wait and hold before they get started. So the assessment really does give them a solid template. Matter of fact, I think it's extremely high risk not to go through that exercise first, and it really is. It's the first two phases of a formal process. There's a danger in starting a book on chapter 5, and really the right place to begin, if you're really going to stand up a practice, not just build an experimental model, is to go through the steps of understanding your organization's overall readiness for analytics. Keith, I'm sorry to keep you muted. Your voice quality is great. It's just we're getting very strong echo when I unmute, but you're coming through loud and clear. What would you like to expand upon as far as what you'd need to establish an internal practice?
Sure. Sorry about the echo, Eric. Hopefully it's not as bad. The main thing I would observe is that I found in most organizations that they underestimate the talent that they already have in-house. Certainly, one anticipates that you're going to go to HR and maybe make some new hires because you're creating a new department, and that's fine. But you certainly want to recruit from within for some of those roles. Now, of course, you want to be careful not to poach from another team that needs that person. But the thing is, there's almost always, in my experience, somebody who has a stack of predictive analytics books on their nightstand, and they're just waiting for that moment when the coach will put them in the game. And I find that by having unrealistic expectations in advertised positions, that 5 years of R, 5 years of Python, 5 years of a dozen other things, that it's impossible to fill it with that description, and then people ignore the resources that they already have. That would be my 2 cents on that.
Sure, and a great 2 cents it is. Go ahead and, no, I think those are great considerations. Like I say, we had a shy group today with a few questions, and we are coming up at half past the hour, and number of attendees is diminishing, but we still have a good number with us that have been interested, obviously, in all of the content that we've conveyed, as well as the interactions in the Q&A, and we're certainly grateful for that. But coming up at 30 past, I think we'd better draw this event to a close, and I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Keith for their great segments, and Keith and Sandra for the highly informative Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you, and from there, we'll hope you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. So make sure to register quickly to secure one of the few remaining very early bird discount seats for the May 16th through 20th series in Washington, D.C., or mark your calendar now and secure the very early bird discount rate for the Los Angeles production in August if the timing and location work out better for you. And keep in mind that your colleagues can join you anytime for 30% off at the same event. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, Sandra, and Keith, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the broadcast to a close.